Imagine, imagine risking it all. Life and limb through treacherous jungles and all for a flower.
A flower?
Yep, a flower.
Yeah.
That's exactly what happened during the Victorian era when Orchid Delirium gripped the world.
Orchid Delirium, huh?
Yeah. So today we're diving deep into the captivating history of orchids. We'll go from their ancient origins to the lengths people went to possess them and why these seemingly delicate flowers spark such a frenzy. You might be surprised to learn just how much orchids have shaped our world.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, from the vanilla in your kitchen to the balance of ecosystems around the globe.
Well, what's fascinating about orchids is that their story, it intertwines with our own in ways you might not expect. We often think of them as, delicate, exotic beauties, but they're actually incredibly adaptable survivors. They've got a history dating back millions of years.
Okay, let's unpack this. Just how old are we talking?
Orchids are ancient, at least 20 million years old.
20 million.
At least. To put that into perspective, they were already thriving when dinosaurs roamed the earth.
Oh, wow.
In fact, there's evidence of this ancient lineage in a remarkable discovery from 2007, a bee perfectly preserved in amber carrying orchid pollen.
Whoa. Talk about a time capsule. So 20 million years of evolution, that's got to result in some pretty incredible diversity, right?
Absolutely. There are over 27,000 known species of orchids.
27,000.
Yeah, and they're found almost everywhere on Earth, except for, open water, true deserts, and glaciers.
That's mind-boggling.
Mm-hmm.
But I always picture orchids as these delicate, tropical flowers. Are there really orchids growing in, say, my backyard?
While you might not find the same showy orchids in your backyard as you would in, say, a rainforest, there's a good chance you have some less conspicuous orchid species nearby.
Really?
Yeah, they've adapted to a range of environments and come in a surprising variety of forms. Some grow on the ground, others cling to rocks, and some even perch on other plants.
Perch it on other plants?
Yeah, those are called epiphytes.
Epiphytes. Now that sounds like something out of a science fiction movie.
It's a perfect example of their adaptability. Epiphytes aren't parasites. They use their host plant simply for support, drawing nutrients from the air and rainfall.
So they're not stealing anything from the host plant.
Exactly. They've evolved this incredible way to thrive in environments where competition for resources is fierce.
It's like they found a loophole in the whole survival of the fittest thing.
You could say that. And speaking of survival, orchids have developed some truly ingenious ways to attract pollinators, often through trickery.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Tell me more about this orchid trickery.
Some orchids, for example, mimic female bees, not just in appearance, but also in scent. This lures unsuspecting male bees who attempt to mate with the flower and end up pollinating it in the process.
So they're basically catfishing the bees.
You could say that. Then you have the Dracula orchid.
Dracula orchid.
Which takes a rather pungent approach to attracting pollinators. It emits a smell reminiscent of, dung, urine, and decaying meat.
Ooh. That one's definitely not going in my garden.
It's certainly unique. And then there's the slipper orchid.
Okay.
With its pouch-like petal that traps insects.
Traps insects?
Yeah, they're forced to exit through a narrow path, brushing against pollen as they escape.
Interesting.
It's like a botanical escape room, but with a very specific purpose.
These orchids are like master manipulators.
Yeah.
But it makes sense. They've had millions of years to perfect these strategies.
Exactly. Their coevolution with pollinators is a testament to the power of natural selection. Speaking of coevolution, have you heard the story of Charles Darwin and the orchid that predicted a moth?
Oh yeah, I remember learning about that in school.
Darwin was studying the Angraecum sesquipedale, an orchid with an incredibly deep nectar well. About 11 inches long. 11 inches? Yeah, he posited that there must be a moth with a proboscis long enough to reach that nectar, and in doing so, pollinate the orchid. It was
a bold prediction, wasn't it? And he was ridiculed for it at the time.
He was, but as it turned out, Darwin was right. The moth, Xanthopan morgana predicta, was discovered in 1907, more than 40 years after Darwin's prediction.
More than 40 years.
Yeah, and footage of it pollinating the orchid wasn't captured until 1992.
That's incredible. It just goes to show how closely intertwined orchids are with their pollinators, right?
Absolutely. Their fates are often intertwined, which is why it's so important to consider the ecological impact when we talk about things like, orchid collecting.
Speaking of orchid collecting, this was happening right around the time Orchid Delirium was taking root in Victorian England, wasn't it?
Precisely. The mid-19th century was a time of intense fascination with the exotic and the rare, and orchids with their delicate beauty and far-flung origins became the ultimate status symbol.
It all started, as the story goes, with botanist William John Swainson. He accidentally sparked the craze by using unbloomed orchids as packing material for other plants he was shipping from Brazil to England.
Imagine the surprise when those seemingly insignificant weeds burst into bloom, captivating everyone who saw them.
Talk about a happy accident. I bet those plain brown boxes suddenly became a lot more interesting.
They did, and that's when things really took off. Suddenly, everyone who is anyone had to have orchids.
And of course, where there's demand, there's opportunity.
Enter Frederick Sander, a German-born entrepreneur who would become the orchid king of Victorian England.
Sander teamed up with the legendary plant hunter Benedict Rosel, and together they became a powerhouse in the orchid world.
Rosal, with his hook hand and countless tales of daring adventures, was the epitome of the intrepid explorer. He traveled all over the world, facing incredible dangers to collect these precious specimens for Sander's nurseries.
And Sander, with his business acumen and passion for orchids, cultivated and sold them on an unprecedented scale. He even published a lavishly illustrated 4-volume compendium of orchids, Reichenbachia, which only fueled the obsession further.
Sander's nurseries were truly a sight to behold. Acres upon acres of greenhouses teeming with thousands upon thousands of orchids in every imaginable shape and color. He brought orchids to the masses, making them accessible to those who could never dream of venturing into the jungles themselves.
But of course, behind the beauty and the glamour of these exotic flowers lay a darker side. The world of orchid hunting was a perilous one, fraught with danger and often tragedy.
You're absolutely right. The orchid hunters faced incredible risks, and many paid the ultimate price for their obsession.
And that's what we'll be diving into next. But first, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned so far. The story of orchids is a testament to the power of evolution, the interconnectedness of life on Earth, and the lengths to which humans will go to possess beauty and wonder.
It's a story that has captivated people for centuries and continues to fascinate us today.
So we've talked about the captivating beauty and the fascinating evolutionary history of orchids, but let's not forget this obsession, this orchid delirium. It had a darker side too, right?
Absolutely. For many orchid hunters, the pursuit of these exotic treasures came at a high cost.
It sounds like something out of an adventure novel. Tell me what kinds of dangers were these hunters facing?
Well, imagine yourself hacking through dense jungles, navigating treacherous terrain, with the constant threat of disease, wild animals, and even rival hunters.
Rival hunters? You mean things could get competitive out there?
Oh, incredibly so. These hunters were often driven by a combination of passion, ambition, and let's be honest, the prospect of financial gain. They would go to great lengths to secure rare specimens, sometimes even resorting to sabotage or worse.
It's hard to believe that a flower could spark such intense rivalries. But I guess when you consider the status and wealth associated with owning rare orchids, it starts to make sense.
Exactly. Remember, we're talking about a time when orchids were the ultimate status symbol, a way to showcase your wealth and sophistication.
So in a way, these orchid hunters were like the rock stars of the Victorian era.
In a sense, yes, they were often seen as daring adventurers, bringing back exotic treasures from far off lands, but the reality was often far more grim.
Well, you mentioned rivalries. Were there any particularly dramatic stories of hunters clashing with each other?
There are many tales of hunters sabotaging each other's finds, spreading rumors to mislead rivals, and even engaging in physical altercations. One particular harrowing story involves William Arnold, a hunter who drowned in a river after narrowly avoiding a duel with a competitor.
A duel over orchids. That's intense. It's amazing how far people were willing to go.
And it wasn't just rival hunters they had to worry about. Benedict Russell, Sanders' partner and one of the most prolific orchid hunters of all time, was robbed a staggering 17 times during his career.
17 times. That's almost unbelievable. And he still kept going back for more.
He did. It speaks to his incredible resilience and dedication to his craft.
So it sounds like Russell had his fair share of scrapes, but were there any other hunters who met particularly unfortunate ends?
Sadly, yes. William Michelitz, another successful hunter who worked for Sander, faced numerous perils during his expeditions. He witnessed beheadings, dismemberments, and all sorts of horrors. Sander often pushed his hunters to their limits,
Yeah.
sending them to increasingly dangerous locations in pursuit of the rarest specimens.
That's tragic. Sounds like Michelitz really paid a price for his involvement in the orchid trade.
He did, and sadly, despite his success as a hunter, Michelitz died nearly destitute. A reminder that the orchid trade, for all its allure, was often exploitative and left many of its workers broken and forgotten.
It's a side of the story that's often overlooked. We tend to romanticize these adventures, but the reality was often far more grim.
Exactly, and it wasn't just the hunters who faced danger. The orchids themselves were also at risk. Transporting these delicate plants across vast distances through jungles, over mountains, and across oceans was a logistical nightmare.
I can imagine. Were there any accounts from that time that really captured the challenges they faced?
There are many. A particularly vivid account comes from a 1906 article in the Washington, D.C. Evening Star. It describes how hunters would pack orchids by coolie in Assam, by long-necked llama in the Andes, by raft or elephant, and still countless plants would perish during the long journey.
It's heartbreaking to think of all those orchids dying in transit,
Yeah.
all for the sake of satisfying a fleeting fashion.
It highlights the short-sightedness of Orchid Delirium. The focus was on acquisition, on possessing these rare and exotic flowers, with little regard for the long-term consequences. Entire species were decimated, and delicate ecosystems were disrupted.
It reminds me of something you mentioned earlier about the interconnectedness of orchids and their pollinators. I imagine collecting them on such a massive scale must have had a devastating impact on those relationships as well.
Absolutely. Orchids and their pollinators have co-evolved over millions of years, developing intricate and often exclusive relationships. When you remove orchids from their natural habitat, you disrupt those delicate balances,
Yeah.
potentially leading to the decline of both the orchids and their pollinators.
It's a ripple effect that can have far-reaching consequences.
Exactly, and one of the most striking examples of this is the story of the lady slipper orchid in Britain.
Oh yeah, I remember reading about that. Wasn't it declared extinct at one point?
It was the lady slipper with its distinctive pouch-like petal was a particular favorite of collectors.
Hmm.
It was so heavily collected that it vanished from the wild entirely and was officially declared extinct in Britain in 1917.
It's a tragic tale, a cautionary reminder of what can happen when human desire overrides ecological considerations.
It is, but thankfully there's a glimmer of hope in this story. In the 1930s, a single lady slipper orchid was miraculously rediscovered in the Yorkshire Dales.
Wow, what are the odds of that? It's like finding a needle in a haystack.
It truly was a botanical miracle,
Mhm.
and it sparked a renewed effort to protect and propagate the species. A group called the Cypedium Committee was formed to safeguard the remaining plants and cultivate new ones.
So they basically rallied around this one surviving plant.
They did. They went to extraordinary lengths to protect that single plant, even guarding it with police. It's amazing how much one little flower could mobilize people.
It's a testament to the growing awareness of the need for conservation. People were beginning to understand that the beauty and wonder of nature were worth protecting, not just exploiting.
Exactly, and thanks to their tireless efforts, the lady slipper orchid is making a comeback. They managed to propagate the plant and establish new populations in secret locations, and eventually a nature reserve in Lancaster was able to create a thriving colony of lady slipper orchids that is now open to the public.
That's a wonderful testament to what can be achieved when people work together to protect our natural heritage. It gives me hope that we can learn from the mistakes of the past and find ways to appreciate the beauty of orchids without jeopardizing their survival.
I agree, but sadly, the challenges haven't gone away entirely. The orchid trade is still a multi-billion-dollar industry today, and there are still those who are willing to exploit these precious plants for profit. Orchid delirium may have faded from the headlines, but the allure of orchids remains, and with that allure comes the temptation to overcollect, to smuggle, to disrupt delicate ecosystems for the sake of a rare specimen.
So while the Lady Slipper Orchid story offers hope, it also serves as a stark reminder that we can't afford to be complacent. The story of Orchid Delirium with its triumphs and tragedies is a cautionary tale.
It's a reminder that our fascination with the natural world must be tempered with respect and responsibility. We need to be mindful of the impact our desires can have on the delicate balance of nature.
Well said. But what does that look like in a practical sense? What can we do to ensure that orchids continue to thrive for generations to come?
That's a great question, and it's one we'll delve into after a quick moment to gather our thoughts.
So we've journeyed from the ancient origins of orchids through the heights of Orchid Delirium to the challenges they face today. It seems like we're at a crossroads. How do we balance our fascination with these exotic beauties with the responsibility to protect them?
It's a delicate balance for sure. While orchid delirium might be a thing of the past, the allure of orchids it hasn't faded, and that's where the complexity lies. The orchid trade today is a mix of ethical practices and unsustainable ones, driven by both genuine appreciation and unfortunately greed.
So what can we do as individuals, as orchid enthusiasts, or even just plant lovers, to make sure we're not contributing to the problem?
A great question. Knowledge is power.
Yeah.
Before you buy an orchid, do your research. Are you getting it from a reputable source? Do they follow sustainable practices? Where did that orchid originally come from?
So you're saying no more impulse buys at the grocery store.
Well, those orchids are usually cultivated varieties, so they're not as big a concern from a conservation standpoint. But if you're looking for something rare or unusual, it's essential to do your due diligence.
Got it. So be a conscious consumer. What else?
Support organizations working to protect orchids and their habitats. There are many groups dedicated to orchid conservation research and education. You can volunteer, donate, or spread awareness.
And maybe even learn more about the orchids themselves. I have to admit I'm guilty of seeing them as just beautiful decorations. I haven't really thought about their complex needs.
That's a great point. Orchids aren't your average houseplants. They need specific conditions: light, temperature, humidity, even the type of pot and soil they prefer. Understanding these needs is key to ensuring their well-being.
It makes you appreciate them on a whole other level. It's like you're not just buying a flower. You're welcoming a little piece of a complex ecosystem into your home.
Exactly. It's about fostering a relationship, not not just acquiring an object.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And speaking of relationships, we can't forget about the crucial role orchids play in their ecosystems, especially their intricate connections with pollinators.
That's something people often overlook. When you take an orchid from the wild, you're not just taking a plant. You're potentially disrupting an intricate web of life that has evolved over millions of years.
It's like pulling a thread from a tapestry. You never know how far the unraveling will go.
A perfect analogy, and it's not just pollinators. Orchids also have they also have symbiotic relationships with fungi in the soil. These fungi help the orchids access nutrients. So it's a whole interconnected system, and we're only beginning to understand its complexities.
This has really been eye-opening. It makes you realize that something as seemingly simple as buying an orchid has all these layers of ecological and ethical considerations.
That's the beauty of a deep dive, isn't it? You start with something familiar, and suddenly you're seeing a whole new world of connections.
So as we wrap up our exploration of Orchid Delirium, what's the one thing you hope listeners will take away from this conversation?
I'd say it's this. Orchids are incredible testaments to the beauty, diversity, and resilience of life on Earth, but they're also a reminder of our responsibility as stewards of this planet. Let's learn from the mistakes of Orchid Delirium and ensure that future generations can continue to marvel at these extraordinary plants.
Beautifully said. And I have a feeling that the next time our listeners encounter an orchid, they'll see it in a whole new light, appreciating not just its beauty, but also the incredible journey it took to reach them.
I hope so, because ultimately the story of orchids is a story about our own relationship with nature. It's a story that's still being written, and we have the power to shape its ending.
And on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive. But before we go, I have one final thought for you to ponder. We've talked a lot about the ecological impact of collecting orchids from the wild, but what about the ethics of cultivating them in artificial environments? Is that a form of exploitation too, or is it a way to appreciate their beauty without harming them in their natural habitats? It's a question worth considering as we navigate our relationship with these captivating plants.
That's an excellent point. It's something for all of us to consider.
Thanks for joining us on this journey into the world of orchids. If you enjoyed this deep dive, be sure to subscribe for more fascinating explorations. Until next time, keep diving.